Stanford University.
Thank you. I want to start by giving thanks to Dr. Ketter and his group for organizing such a great day and for the chance to be here. It is terrific to see so many people here learning the latest findings and what to do. So fabulous to be here. I'm going to be talking about triggers for bipolar disorder, for the symptoms in bipolar disorder. And I'm going to start with a kind of strange part of all this, which is that we know that bipolar disorder and mania are really very genetically driven. So why would you study triggers? I think there's actually a lot that genes don't tell us. Like, why does a person develop symptoms on Tuesday, March 4th, or April 3rd, or on any given day? Why do the symptoms come on then? And how do we know when somebody's about to move into a high-risk period? Some caveats about all this. This is pretty new science, and so we know some triggers, but we don't know everything. There's a bunch of gaps in our knowledge. There's probably some triggers we don't even know about yet. And the triggers probably differ for each person at some level. I think that one of the best ways to get a better sense of your own personal triggers is monitoring. Jennifer was a great setup for me because we think very similarly. Okay, so big picture, the first thing to know is that the triggers for depression and mania seem to be very different. If we're talking about bipolar depression, the triggers are actually very, very much like the triggers of unipolar depression. There are things like when people go through very major negative life events, like losing a family member, losing a core relationship, troubles, big troubles on the job front. Those are high-risk periods for depression. So are periods of feeling isolated or more alone or not having people to count on. Jennifer talked about this, thinking negatively about the self. And here one of the things we've learned is that there are some people who keep being able to criticize themselves and be too harsh even after the depression goes away. And those folks are at higher risk for the depression coming back. There are also some people that even after the depression goes away, they tend to just experience negative moods more intensely, more often, and that's a bit of a kind of risk factor for depressions coming on more often. And then family conflict and negativity in the family, fighting in the family, can kind of set the stage for depression to unfold. So we know a fair amount here. I'm going to kind of boil this down to a simpler way of thinking about it, which is that when bad stuff happens, depression's more likely. So negative stimuli, if you want a technical term. Now, here's the strange thing. Those variables do not help one lick in predicting mania. They just don't. Some of the more common triggers of mania are things like medication and drug changes. If I was going to pick one class of drugs to worry about, it would be anything that's overly stimulating that might interfere with sleep. Things like too much caffeine during the day. There are even some cold medicines that are kind of agitating, stimulating. Speed, LSD, if it messes with sleep, it's probably bad news. The other thing that we see is that people will kind of do really well for a while and start to feel like, okay, I'm on top of this, I'm fine, I don't need my medications anymore. They'll take a drug holiday and then they're at high risk for relapse during that time. So that's something to just be really careful about. But then there are two other classes I want to talk about, and those have to do with sleep and schedule and a domain that we call reward that I'm going to define in a minute here. So what about sleep? We have known for decades now that sleep deprivation and schedule disruption can trigger mania. There are some Italians that did this study where they took a group of people with bipolar depression, kept them up all night, and by the next morning, 10 to 15% of them were starting to experience mania. One night of sleep. Now, I would never do that study, but I think it helps us to know the answer. So the APA has said if you're going to get treatment for bipolar disorder, one of the things that should be in your toolkit is establishing regular sleep routines, good sleep habits. At a really broad level, that means a minimum time in bed every night. Say 8 hours is kind of standard, although most Americans don't hit this. It's important. And if you can't sleep, just resting in a dark room, turning off the TV, the radio, and even your own image of all the things you could conquer tomorrow is a good idea. Regularity in sleep schedule ends up being a very, very important part of all this, and there's some nice evidence on that front. So going to bed, for example, at the same time every night, even on the weekends, even when your friend's in town, even when there's a great movie on TV, go to bed at the same time. Now, that probably means that shift work is trouble, and it probably means you want to be careful about travel and watching what happens if you travel across time zones. But mostly what it means is set your schedule and protect it like a religion. Now, something about mania also seems tied to excitement about rewards and pursuing big dreams and conquering hurdles. The cartoonists know this. This one says, oh, just a few souvenirs from my bipolar disorder days. How does this thing work? We know something about brain regions that activate in response to kind of good things that might happen. The nucleus accumbens is a big area. And we have self-report scales where we can ask people questions to measure this, like when I get something I want, I get excited and energized. How true is this for you? So we ask people a lot of questions like that when they're in a period between any kind of episodes. And there have been about 15 studies now that have done this, and what they show is that reward sensitivity is higher among people with bipolar disorder. They're much more likely to say yes to those questions. That even within bipolar disorder, people who are more like that tend to have more mania over time. And now there's 3 new studies saying that this can help us predict who develops the disorder in a high-risk sample. But what does that really look like? One of the things that I thought about hearing a lot of stories from people is that sometimes it looks like a lot of ambition, a lot of drive, a lot of goals. And so we developed a scale to say, well, what would be our big, big goals in life? And we put together some of the biggest goals we could imagine, like becoming president, and writing successful books, and being on TV, or being in movies. And what we found now across 9 studies is that people who have bipolar disorder and people who have mild symptoms of mania in their history, even when they're well, endorse these dreams and ambitions more than other people do. Now, I put up a slightly complex slide to show you that depression isn't the story here. The blue and the green are people with and without a history of depression who all have mania. Always the same story. It's not a depression story, it's a mania story. And it's about a history of mania being related to bigger dreams. So lifetime mania experiences seem tied to high ambition. And some of that might be good. We think that part of this might explain why some of the family members of people with bipolar disorder show such exceptional accomplishments. One of my favorite quotes from the 50s, somebody wrote, "We should thank the first manic depressive that had the courage to cross the Bering Strait." Sometimes big dreams help society, even when they don't help a person. Now, if you were reward sensitive and you had these big dreams and ambitions, what would happen when success happened in your life? We think it would mean you'd respond more. And now in 3 long-term studies tracking people every month to look at symptoms and life events that involved goals coming true, what we've seen is people are more likely to develop mania after they've had one of these kinds of success events. Now, that's predictability. It's also horror, because I don't like being the person who stands here and says, when good things happen, you need to be careful. Discouraging. So what we spent 10 years doing is saying, well, what happens after a success, so that we can understand how to put the brakes on critical processes that may be different for people with bipolar disorder, so they can still live life fully, have their success, but know what to watch out for. So what happens after a reward or a success or a dream come true? And what's different in bipolar disorder? There's a study about this in the 70s, basically. These guys took people who had a history of very mild manic symptoms, gave them a small success experience, and then said, I'm going to flip a coin. You tell me, what are the odds you're going to guess heads or tails correctly? Now, there is a right answer to this, and what's the right answer? Okay, unless you're bipolar and you've just had a big success. Then the answer is, oh, 85, bring it on. Everybody else stays at 50-50. Bipolars who are on a tear don't. What happens is they start to get overly optimistic, they are underestimating risks or dangers, and they're overestimating what they can do and conquer. Okay? So those are the early warning signs we worry about. And a lot of you, I know a lot of my clients have said, but Dr. J, I want to wake up in the morning and have that confidence. That's okay until a person starts to take excessive risks or get too busy. One of the things we really look for is getting too busy and more active. So let me kind of put this all back into some small circles. What have we talked about? That mania, the findings out there say that mania is somehow tied in with reward sensitivity and ambition and life events that involve goals coming true and confidence and goal engagement, this kind of getting too busy, this whole pack of things that kind of hang together. Then you could call sensitivity to reward. There's also sleep deprivation. There's also stimulants. And if I were going to kind of give that one giant label, what I might call it is just activating stimuli. Things that get people revved are kind of high-risk warning sign periods. And then the bad stuff, the negative stimuli, are more of the high-risk periods for depressive symptoms to come on. Now, why does all this matter? Why do you want to know all this bad news about things to watch out for? Well, I think it matters because, one, hopefully it means symptoms don't come on as much out of the blue and clobber people without warning. So that having a little bit more ability to predict gives you a little bit more ability to protect. So that during these kind of high-risk periods, if you know you're going through things that are really activating or really hard, that those are the times that you and your friends and your family and your doctor can be on alert. That this is a time where I may need some extra help. I want to really watch out for early warning signs, and I want to take steps to keep my life kind of protected. And I think there's a lot of strategies. CBT is good like this. There's a lot of strategies you can use to help with each one of the triggers that I've raised. There's a lot of ways to kind of keep brakes on the system in the middle of these kinds of events. And so in this way, knowing more about triggers and how to cope with them hopefully provides a supplement to medications. It's not that I'm saying this will ever replace medications, but it gives another tool for staying well longer and protecting your life. Now, this was a snapshot tour. We tried to write down a lot about what we think about what to watch for and what to do if it comes on in a new book that's coming out within weeks. So this is our book. We're hoping it hits the stores soon. Gives a lot more detail on all this. And I want to say thanks. And do I have time for a couple questions? Do people have any questions? Yes?
When you said that mania was connected to ambition and goals, is it the goal or is it the pressure that people put on themselves when they're trying to achieve that goal? Because I think the two are quite separate.
Yeah, there's two different things. A lot of people very quietly in the background hold bigger dreams than other people do. And we can talk about why that might be. They're not always real revved up around those goals. It's like a quiet dream. And there are then periods where people will move into kind of hyper gear and pursuing those and putting a lot of pressure on. I need to get there. I need to do this. I'm going to do 90 things to get there. I'm going to go all out. That seems to be the kind of thing I would watch for. So one of the things we try and teach people to do is not lose your dreams, but lose some of the pressure around getting there today. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to put my email on the board, and then anyone who wants a copy can email me. I also have flyers with our contact information, so absolutely, anything I can do to help. Yes, I can. Actually, we'll do this. It'll be a little higher, too. Make sure you get the L in there. If you just write to S. Johnson, it's not me. It's somebody in history who's getting really tired of my emails. What else? Yeah.
When people feel overwhelmed, what is that? What creates feeling overwhelmed? Too much is going on, or how come all of a sudden you feel overwhelmed about it?
You know, one of the things that seems to happen is that it gets harder to kind of have a filter and step back from things, whether it's bad things and feeling like I need to fix all this right now, or good things and feeling like I need to fix all this right now. And so one of the things is to be able to kind of step back, really take a breath, practice mindfulness. Dominic Lamb, and if you email me, I'll send you an article on this. He surveyed a lot of people with bipolar disorder and said, what do you do when you're going through that moment? And just came up with a whole lot of ideas. We've done similar stuff, and people talk about things like even just, take one day's break from it all. The problems, the stuff that needs to be done is going to be there. Get a good night's sleep, come back in fresh. If it's in the moment, kind of taking 10 deep breaths. Some people use, I'm going to go sit in a rocking chair for 10 minutes. But Dominic Lamb did this really nice survey of about 75 people to say, what strategies do you use? And he found that people who were using more of those strategies stayed well for longer periods.
What brings on the overwhelm? Anxiety or I'm overwhelmed?
Kind of arousal, which can go towards anxiety or mania, or kind of that it's too much. Okay. Yeah. And so I think of arousal being a big part of that, and so anything that kind of helps shake off the arousal can be really, really helpful. Yes?
Is the same in children?
We haven't particularly done studies in children. We've seen a very similar profile in adolescents. The literature's really slim. I don't have reason to think it's different, but I also don't have the data to say it's the same. So I want to make sure we don't run over. So are we okay for?
Maybe one more question.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi. So if somebody is in a state of mania where they have a bunch of goals and they're trying to get stuff done, and then they're interrupted, what do studies say would happen? Do they quickly flip to the opposite side of things?
So it turns out that if goals matter more, then you probably can almost, and you probably in your own experience can predict this, what's more likely to happen for somebody with bipolar disorder than somebody else is that if a goal is thwarted, if they're told like, okay, you must stop right now, they experience much more frustration, and it takes longer to shake off the frustration. So, so strategies, again, for kind of how to kind of somehow find perspective in the middle of that moment, because it does feel more intense, to be stopped. And that's something that's hard on partners too, because partners often can watch this cycle going and they're sort of saying, you got to be careful, you got to be careful, you're getting revved, and they're trying to stop the kind of train that's leaving the station. But that's hard to do when somebody's feeling that sense of urgency. And so sometimes working with partners around this is a really delicate process. One of the flyers we have is for a couple study where we're interested in interviewing couples about how they deal with those delicate moments and learning as much as we can about the strategies people use in their relationships around this front. So thank you so much. These are great questions.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.